Just Monica. Why don't you come in there? Please.
Shama, Shama.
Oh, sorry.
Good afternoon. Please be seated. For those of you that were not here for the earlier event, I am Michael Eng, the president of Santa Clara University, and it's my particular pleasure to welcome you to this very special session this afternoon. We're profoundly honored to have His Holiness the Dalai Lama to campus for this special session this afternoon. This morning I mentioned that Santa Clara is a place where issues of ethics and social justice intersect with corporate responsibility and high-tech enterprise. So I'm pleased that we have another opportunity for discussion and dialogue on these issues with His Holiness. I want to thank Michael Fitzpatrick for his performance of an invocation of world peace. Finally, let me introduce Kirk Hanson. Kirk is the Executive Director of the Markkula Center for Applied Ethics here at Santa Clara University. It's the largest ethics center in the United States with extensive programs in business ethics, bioethics, government ethics, internet ethics, and character education. Please welcome Kirk Hanson.
Thank you. Would you like to speak from here today or from the podium?
What?
Would you like to speak from here? Oh, okay, so, good. I'll come up here. As Father Ing said, I'm Kirk Hanson, Executive Director of the Markkula Center for Applied Ethics, and it's a profound privilege to have His Holiness with us this afternoon. First, just a couple of housekeeping details. Thank you all for coming. We have invited a very special group of Silicon Valley leaders for this afternoon session. And if some of you were here this morning, we hope to get more specific about how to bring compassion into a large organization, into a corporation. The messages for administrative concerns. First, if you do have a cell phone, would you please mute it and put it on vibrate? It is certainly all right to use in Silicon Valley to use electronic devices. The hashtag for today is Dalai Lama SCU. There is also a Wi-Fi connection, Dalai Lama SCU, that is unprotected, so that you can go ahead and hook up and we can read everything that you're saying. This afternoon's session is indeed dedicated to exploring the subject of the role of compassion in business and in large organizations. Your Holiness, I want to introduce your panel participants to you. Jane Shaw on the far end is a retired CEO from the biotechnology industry who has recently spent several years as chair of one of our largest companies, the Intel Corporation. She has long championed ethical values in business and is strongly dedicated also to interfaith dialogue, serving currently as the chair of the board of Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. Chuck Geschke, on this end, is co-founder and chair of Adobe, Inc., one of Silicon Valley's most successful companies. He and his co-founder have thought deeply about how to create a company that is successful and also demonstrates an ethical sensibility. We hope to be joined by Monica Worline, a co-founder and research fellow of the CompassionLab at University of Michigan. Our theme this afternoon is the practical need to translate our human values of compassion and ethical behavior into practice, both as individuals who work in organizations and as executives that create and manage organizations. A little later, our panelists will share some of their experiences and the research that they have done. Your Holiness, to begin our conversation, we would be particularly interested in your thoughts on three questions. First, today's Silicon Valley, sometimes we think our religion is rapid change. We find it hard to stop long enough to ask questions about how our behaviors affect others, how to act ethically as we rush to introduce the next generation of technology, or decide whether to sell our company or to acquire another. How can we become more compassionate and therefore ethical in an environment where there seems to be no time to do either. Second area we would like to explore with you: stress is the reality of our lives, particularly in Silicon Valley, particularly in the startups and the giant corporations represented in this room. We multitask, we work 24/7. We cope with huge uncertainty and risk. How can the themes that you articulate of becoming more compassionate help these leaders cope with the high stress environment that they work in day to day? And thirdly, Silicon Valley prides itself as a place where risk-taking is embraced. Yet, if we are entirely honest, we would have to admit that even for the very few who succeed and have substantial wealth, risk-taking can be painful. There is much suffering where risks we have taken don't pan out and where they are still pending as risks in our daily lives. There is suffering when risks taken by others affect us, perhaps costing us our jobs or costing us the future that we hoped for. How can your approach to compassion help us when we suffer from or have to live with that risk-taking environment? That should be more than enough agenda for this afternoon. So, Your Holiness, may I invite you to come speak to us?
Stress. Forget it. I'm Dutch. Where to start?
Please.
I think maybe first other speaker say, then I will listen, then I may get some ideas.
All right.
Otherwise, nothing to say.
I'm sure that's not true.
Chuck, may I invite you to begin? Chuck Geschke of
Yes.
Adobe, and explain some of your experience with Adobe.
Certainly. Well, first of all, I'm absolutely delighted and honored to have the opportunity to spend this afternoon with you, Your Holiness. And I know my three colleagues are as well. As I prepared for today's panel, I had the opportunity to read your book entitled The Art of Happiness at Work. And I found the observation on an individual's relationship to work most enlightening and informative. This afternoon, though, I've chosen to focus my remarks from a slightly different perspective. Less from the viewpoint of an individual employee, but rather from the perspective of the senior management of a company and their responsibility to create an environment that supports compassion and the opportunity to be happy at work. And I'm going to use my experience in founding a company here in Silicon Valley, Adobe Systems, over 30 years ago, as an illustration of the critical importance of compassion as a guiding principle in establishing a successful business. Now, the issue of humanizing our business to reflect my partner John Warnock's and my values was central to our thought process as we took the initial steps of recruiting our first employees and establishing a work ethic and environment for our company. Rather simply put, we wanted to build a company that we would like to work for. And we believe that if we were successful in establishing a hospitable and welcoming culture, coupled with our plans for developing advanced technology, we could be successful in recruiting the very best and the brightest talent to join our company. I'm certain that our success is directly attributed to those initial decisions. Now, why do I believe this? Well, first of all,
Okay.
I'll go as quickly as I can. Why do I believe this? Well, a computer software company, which is in the intellectual property business like we are at Adobe, is quite different from businesses like steel mills or oil refineries or large-scale manufacturing or distribution businesses. Those companies have significant assets. Those capital assets like real estate, sophisticated equipment, and warehouses are critical to their success. But at our company, at Adobe, our only significant assets are people and the ideas that they discover and invent. Now, every night, those assets, those people go home. And unless we build a company that excites them, stimulates them, and rewards them, they're probably not going to come back. And so it's critical that we recognize that those capital assets, those people, could disappear. So we formulated a few simple principles as we began our company, and I would like to summarize those, but I want to emphasize that I believe they're not just simply altruistic concepts intended to make everyone feel good about the company. They're critical concepts for achieving the primary objective of creating and operating a successful business over the long haul. And they may seem simple, but they're very difficult to achieve. So here are the three principles. Number one, hire the best possible people, male or female, independent of their lifestyle choices, their ethnic background, or their race. I constantly repeat to our managers a simple piece of advice. If you wish to advance your career or climb the management ladder, hire people who are smarter than you are. And there's a simple observation. That's a much bigger population than the alternative. The second principle, it's critical that a company support its employees' freedom to maintain the quality of their personal and family life. Our belief is that
with respect to the first principle, His Holiness was asking, what about if you find someone who is very fast thinking, intelligent, and smart, but at the same time quite devious? So what are you going to do?
That's not the kind of quality that you want to focus on. As I said earlier, you want to hire people who can work well in this environment. And the point is that among the people you feel that can work best, you want to hire people who are very smart.
So sense of cooperation is important.
Yes.
So willing to share with others' views or others' experiences.
So you need someone who is able to work as a team.
Yes, absolutely.
As a team.
Because if employees don't like and admire and feel good about their co-employees, they're not going to stay. They're going to leave. And those are the assets we don't want to lose.
아니 전단 장장 집에는 미시가 두자에는 전부 사연은 그냥 그래.
But sometimes you do find individuals whose competence levels are so high, although they may be wanting in their personality side.
Well, that could include me. Yes, sometimes you do make a slight exception. But overall, it's important that the employees feel like they're a team of people who are working
저는 compassion,
together.
honest 좋아합니다.
나는 너
전당 소지마도 honest.
그런 거 그래서 다 메르스니스 데 믹스 단적으로 와서 자외 간다 편전 냠루 진행지 마주니 원스.
Really? Good.
So the second point, it's important that people have the ability to respond to the needs of their personal and family lives. And when we started our company, we bought everyone, this is in the old days before personal computers, we bought each employee a terminal, a modem for communication, and the telephone line so that they could work from home and telecommute if they had family requirements and needs. And again, it's important that employees realize that they have the freedom to make those choices. Because if their family life falls apart, eventually their work life will as well.
The company take care about their own personal
나름 그러셔.
happiness for life. Wonderful. That's very good.
And the last principle arises from an observation. And that is, if you're running a large, typically public company, you have several constituencies that you're responsible to. You have your customers, your employees, your shareholders, the people who own your stock, and the communities in which you operate. And the job of
또 간다 레가치서 소라카와 있는 이코요.
And the job of senior management is to manage those constituencies in such a way that you keep a balance, because what's good for one may not be good for the others. And so it's absolutely critical. We decided we weren't going to try and write down a long manual of what to do and what to not do, but instead we'd install a very simple principle. If you're concerned about how you deal with any other constituency, you treat that individual the way you would like to be treated. Now, that's often called the Golden Rule. It's often attributed to the message of Jesus Christ in the New Testament. But if you go out on the web, you find out it has a much broader foundation than that. And in fact, those principles are part of Confucianism, the Sanskrit tradition in India, Buddhism, Hinduism, and the Quran, among many others. So in summary, if you're responsible for managing a business and you want that business to be successful, you have to make it such that the people who work at that company have an allegiance to it, are happy with their work environment, and that allows them to be successful.
Very good. Very good. 특히 고등 거지 아주 톡직 찬스는 그래. At the beginning, 직 찬스 그래. Of course, I do not know detail, but some people have the view, say, after Second World War, Japan, I think, immense destruction. So New Japan developed from the ashes of destruction, but very successful because the company, they not only taking their own company's interest or profit or these things, but also is taking care of workers'
welfare, well-being.
well-being. So each worker develop the sense of my company,
loyalty,
royalty,
sense of loyalty.
Yes.
royalty.
One of the ways we measure that
So here you see compassion, taking care of their well-being. So genuine, voluntarily sense of cooperation, and because of that, 후지자리.
Responsibility. Now, a sense of responsibility on the part of the workers then naturally arises
So mutual benefit.
Yeah,
If you treated worker as a sort of the part of mission, not much concern about their well-being, then their side also no sort of fully sort of that
Loyalty.
loyalty. Wonderful.
Thank you.
I'm
I'm sure you'll have some harder questions for us.
Yeah, His Holiness was saying. His Holiness was saying that he's very impressed that in your principle you emphasize the golden rule, because your own experience then becomes the measure of how you treat others. In the Buddhist tradition, the golden rule is formulated in the following way, which says that take the experience of your own physical pain as an example and then extend that to others.
Right.
Understand others' experience and refrain from harming others. Yeah.
Oh, next.
Invite Jane Shaw.
May I go to the podium, Kirk?
Please go to the podium.
I think it's actually might be easier if you don't mind speaking from there, because the acoustics is quite bad from
Well,
the
I
podium.
find the echo here, it's hard. We could not hear you.
Oh, okay.
That's why I was thinking it might be better to speak from the podium. But your preference.
Because His Holiness can see
Up to
your...
you. Up to you.
You can see.
You are speaker, so up to you.
All right, from
You
here?
prefer that?
From here?
No, it's up to you. You can choose.
And I'm going up here.
Great opportunity for this.
You
school to do
determined.
some acoustical engineering.
Very good.
There's a very large echo here. Your Holiness, it is a pleasure indeed to share the platform with you this afternoon. Kirk, thank you very much for the invitation. Fellow panelists, I look forward to our continuing dialogue. In preparation for today, I reflected on the 4 different stages of my life and the lessons I have learned from the experiences gained, and I thought I would share some of those with you today. And I hope you find them relevant to the topic of today, which is compassion in the world of business. Stage 1, as a child.
System people.
And His Holiness spoke for me this morning when he spoke about the relationship with his mother, the love he got from his mother, and the family in which he grew up. And as he grew up, how he learned to steer his mother one way or another. I listen to that and I hear many attributes of my own childhood. I grew up in a very small village on a farm in Worcestershire in England. My home is England. It was the post-World War II era, and there was rationing. We had very few worldly goods. We had very little money. I grew up in a Christian community where the church was the center of the village, the center of its social life. I developed a strong sense of family and family values. And rereading recently Robert Fulghum's book, Everything You Need to Learn, You Learn in Kindergarten, I find that his findings resonate with my childhood. And he lists teamwork, share everything, play fair, don't hit people, respect your elders, share what good fortune you have, give back to the world. And if you take the definition of compassion as a feeling of empathy for others, or the emotion that we feel in response to seeing the suffering of others, which motivates a desire to help. My childhood was an incubator for that. So let's move on to stage 2 and becoming an employee. I became the employee of a company called the Alza Corporation, located here in Silicon Valley. It was founded by a man by the name of Dr. Alejandro Zaffaroni, a brilliant entrepreneur, and most importantly, a wonderfully kind, caring, respectful compassionate man. I joined his company and I worked with him for some 24 years. We shared, I found, the same values. He set the tone at the top of the organization. He was intuitive, he was empathetic. He hired, as Chuck referred, we always should, the best people, and he built the best team. He created an environment where, in the business world, compassion was practiced. It resulted in great teamwork. People felt empowered. They had fun. They were creative. Employees met their life partners there. And indeed, I was lucky enough to be one of those. We practiced in the business environment the values that had been imbued in me since childhood. And let me just illustrate a result of creating such a compassionate environment. 10 years after its formation, the Alza Corporation was within 1 month of bankruptcy. The stress level was very, very high. But people had confidence in our leader because of the environment he had created. Nobody left the company. They stayed working long hours. And we did, at the 11th hour, find our white knight. It was a company called Ciba-Geigy, located in Basel, Switzerland. And they came and acquired our company. Now, fast forward 5 years on, and we are regaining our independence as a small, still non-profitable company in Silicon Valley from Ciba-Geigy. And at the request of Dr. Zaffaroni, as that happened, the stock that returned to Alza was not torn up and shredded. It was given to the employees and distributed to them for their years of service to the company. But it was done only, and it was a caveat as the stock came back, after the company had attained $5 million in profitability. It was thought from the plan that would take 3 years. But this loyal team of hardworking people who had now been together for 15 years made that happen in 1 year. Great teamwork. And they were rewarded financially for their loyalty. So one good example. Let me move on now to stage 3, the opportunity to lead my own company. And that I became CEO of a company called the Aerogen Company, which specialized in drug delivery to the lungs to get better respiratory therapy. And I now had the opportunity to create the kind of environment in which I had so flourished at the Alza Corporation. And I want to touch on the 3 issues that Kirk mentioned in his introductory statement. Rapid change. We experienced very rapid change. We took the company from being a private company to being a public company. In the year 2000, 2010, there was incredible change in the financial markets. We had failed clinical trials. We had failed partnerships. A lot of events which led to stress within the organization. And it created a very risky environment for people in which they would stay and work. And here we found that placing trust in our employees was the most important thing that we could do. We informed them of all the issues and the challenges that we were facing. We were very open with them. We trusted them to maintain confidentiality, which they did. We communicated with them frequently. We won their allegiance and their loyalty through that. All knew when it would be important to have a layoff and let some people go. But they knew they would be treated well, and in fact, all got a good severance payment. And when the company fortunes turned around and there was opportunity to rehire people, many of those people came back to us. They boomeranged back, as we called it, and we celebrated their return. And so last and onward to the 4th stage of my career, which has been in the boardroom. I was privileged to have the opportunity to serve on the board of the Intel Corporation for a number of years, and my last 3 years, I served as chairman. Now, in the boardroom, you are the guardians of the culture and the ethics of the organization. And we had at Intel a code of business conduct by which we monitored our compliance with ethical behavior. For example, Intel wanted to build an assembly plant in Vietnam. And there we found bribery was the normal way of doing business. What were we going to do? Because that violated our code of business conduct. We addressed that openly with the Vietnamese. We were emphatic that compliance with our code was mandatory, and there was no issue. It happened, and now there is a very successful assembly plant operating in Vietnam. And finally, I would like to highlight for you one instance where I believe a business decision was totally based on compassion and had a great outcome with little cost to the company. The minerals, tantalum, tin, tungsten, and gold, are critical to the electronic industry. But they're also used in the aerospace industry, the automotive industry, and other major industries. In 2009, at Intel, we received a letter, and it asked whether we were aware that an armed conflict in the eastern region of the Democratic Republic of the Congo had resulted in some 5 million deaths, and by a report from the United Nations, some 200,000 rapes of women. And that conflict in the DRC was fueled by multi-million-dollar trades of minerals, and that it was possible that some of those minerals were making their way into the electronic supply chain that we use. What do you do with a letter like that? Well, Intel personnel met with the authors of the letter in Washington, D.C. to learn more. And we took upon ourselves that we wanted the microprocessors made at Intel to be free of these conflict minerals. So we don't buy the metals directly, but through literally thousands and thousands of suppliers. So we set out to establish a mechanism to track supplies. We wrote letters to each of our suppliers, asking if they knew the source of these 4 minerals that they were passing through. A third replied that they didn't source from the region of the Congo. A third said they had no idea, and a third never replied. So when this was reported back to the CEO, who is now the current CEO of Intel, Brian Krzanich, he said, absolutely unacceptable, and he made it unambiguously clear that Intel wanted its microprocessors to be free of conflict minerals. So the people went backward in the supply chain to the smelters who refine the ore and form the metal. Now, there are only 200 to 300 smelters in the world in many different countries. And we got together a team of other companies and also our industry association. And by the end of 2012, the letter was received in 2009, as I mentioned. The Intel team had covered some 150,000 miles, visited 60 smelters in 20 different countries. An audit system had been established, and all ore coming from good mines was bagged and tagged, so we knew where it was. And at the Consumer Electronics Show this year in Las Vegas, the CEO was able to announce that Intel's shipments of microprocessors were now documented as conflict-free of minerals. So compassion in business, yes, it may cost us, And in this case, it did. It cost us some money, it cost us time. But consider the affected constituencies of the business. First of all, our employees. They felt really good that their company cared and provided such leadership, that the activity built teamwork, that it built loyalty, it stirred pride. For our shareholders, there was minimal financial impact, but what it prevented was the longer-term cost of potential litigation, and most importantly, really adverse publicity. For the supply chain, their costs were not increased at all, but now they had improved collaboration with their customers, and they enjoyed the PR which ensued. So in conclusion, I hope that the examples that I have given you illustrate that I believe the human values of compassion and ethical behavior can be instilled early in life. I would suggest that we need to develop better ways of instilling these behaviors later in life. Leaders of organizations who practice their intuitive and empathetic skills, such as Chuck described, can forge work environments that foster loyalty and hard work, allow for personal growth, and produce great business results. And finally, ethical behavior in large organizations does not have to be costly, and it will result in better outcomes. Thank you.
Your Holiness?
Wonderful, wonderful. I just felt you mentioned you're from England.
Yes,
After war,
yes.
some of the food or these things are rationing.
Rations.
So your face also a little bit thin. So I just felt that.
That's right. You had coupons.
Oh,
Yes, you had to give a coupon if you wanted food.
진짜.
다 간다 주고 슈그룹 스테이지 슈그 티케는 무다 칼라랭가 도그로스나.
Yes.
So in that respect, I think European people have more experience rather than American.
Would you like to respond to a more basic question, which would be, how does one, in an environment that clearly there are temptations to do differently than these executives have described? There are constantly temptations to be not compassionate, but to be the opposite in order to maintain profitability or to survive. And how can one resist that?
The summary after listen the both is it honest, truthful, transparent, and taking care of the workers, and more holistic. Caring principle, such as you see, although you see from somewhere, because of price maybe cheaper, but it not go well with moral principle.
Right, that's correct. I agree.
So finally, you see, your company, more respected company,
Yeah.
so more sort of trust. So these, in the economy field, I think practical level, the moral principle, based on compassion, based on sense of care of others' well-being, and overall, this is sense of sort of responsibility because of the following more honest, more truthful.
Yes.
So wonderful.
Let me invite the audience. You should have gotten a 3x5 card, or there should be cards available to you. If you want to write down a topic for me to raise with His Holiness, you may do that, and there will be individuals at the end of the aisles to collect those cards, and they'll bring them up. We won't have time, obviously, to ask all of them, but I'll try to pick several that represent the questions that you are asking. So, Monica Worline is a researcher, an academic researcher at the University of Michigan's CompassionLab, where she does
Compassion and
laboratory, and where academics are doing research on the impact of compassion in organizations. How does compassion actually work in organizations? And so she's going to give us an insight into some of that research. Do you want to do it from there or from the podium, Monica?
I'll sit here.
Very
Thank
good.
you. Thank you, Kirk, for the introduction. I was going to open my remarks today with 2 expressions of gratitude, but I must add a third. I would like to express gratitude to the members of the Secret Service backstage who found me when I was lost and who very kindly calmed me down. They're very kind.
Good.
I would like to express gratitude for the inclusion of the CompassionLab research in this dialogue today. And I would like to invite the spirit of my CompassionLab colleagues. Many people have participated in the research I will discuss today. We started our first research on this topic in 1999. And finally, the third gratitude is to Your Holiness. I had the opportunity to be in the audience of a dialogue with Your Holiness and neuroscientists at Emory University in 2007. And we had a full day of neuroscience and research on depression. At the end of that day, the moderator turned to His Holiness and invited him to reflect on what this plethora of neuroscience meant for him. There was a long silence, and something profound for me happened. After about 30 seconds, the very large gymnasium with thousands of people became completely silent, and a palpable change came over the crowd. I could feel in my heart. As His Holiness focused his being in that space, he said some very simple words that brought tears flooding into my eyes. He said, "This work matters because so many people in the world are suffering." And while I don't know how His Holiness would describe what happened in that moment, for me, we had moved from the dialogue of the mind to the truth of the heart. And many, many, many people felt that movement and felt the tears come to their eyes. That moment was very inspiring for me and fueled me over many years to continue the work that I have done.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
So the CompassionLab for the past 15 years has been dedicated to the social scientific investigation of one primary question. And that question is, what are the factors beyond the individual that amplify compassion in an organization or that inhibit it? And some of these factors will echo Chuck's experience running a large organization, Jane's experience throughout her life. In order to illustrate what I mean by amplifiers or inhibitors of compassion, I'd like to tell you about 3 primary assumptions and then basically illustrate with a story. The first primary assumption that we make is that organizations are full of pain. The second primary assumption is that organizations are full of people who are good and capable, and mostly want to respond to suffering with compassion. But the third assumption is that organizations, as complex systems, often block that basic impulse toward compassion by making suffering invisible or by making compassionate responding very difficult. So allow me to illustrate this with a story which provides a concrete example of many of the generalizable findings from our research. The story begins in the middle of a very cold winter night when an apartment building burned to the ground. No one was injured, but many people were left without homes and without all of their belongings. One organization near the apartment building had 3 members who had lost everything in the middle of the night, but that organization had no legal responsibility or no formal responsibility for responding to this fire. 2 of the members who had lost everything in the fire were quite hesitant to raise the issue inside the organization because they felt it was their personal responsibility to respond to the loss. And that actually points to an important inhibitor that we've found over and over again in organizations, that it is far more difficult for people to discern suffering in organizations than we think it is. The demands for professional reputation, the demands to look competent, many organizations that have display rules that tell us it's not okay to express emotion at work make it much more difficult for us to find among our colleagues and coworkers the difficulties of their lives. The third member of this organization, who had lost everything in the fire that night, was much more intent on seeking help. She actually physically showed up in the organization wearing her pajamas, her overcoat, and her boots, which were the only things she had left. She was disheveled, she was covered in soot, and she reeked of smoke. And when she appeared in the organization looking and smelling like this, it made the suffering real for people. And very quickly, they began to put out calls all over the organization to others that they thought could help. In our research, these networks are an amplifier. And in the lingo of Silicon Valley, we could say that networks and organizations make the call for compassion go viral, which it did in this case. And the 3 members of this organization received a great deal of donated goods, like clothing and food and household goods, a substantial financial donation, many offers of social support and helping, and profound expressions of emotional support and care and concern. Now, regardless of the kind of suffering or the kind of organization that we have studied, even in this organization, we ran across another important inhibitor, which is that managers and leaders worry that by expressing compassion to one person, they'll be taken advantage of in the future, or they will appear weak to their other employees. In this particular case, this organization had access to a full-service hotel that was used to house executives. The director of the hospitality unit refused to offer temporary housing to the 3 people who had lost their homes in the fire because the policy stated the housing was to be used for executives only, And he was worried that in the future he would receive many more requests for exception. We can see in this inhibitor that a rigid rule interpreted by someone who's afraid of sanction for breaking the rule can inhibit compassion, even when the person feels empathy, as this director did, and even when the organization itself values compassion, which this organization did. So, I know a quote attributed to His Holiness that one should know the rules well in order to break them appropriately.
Say that again?
One should know the rules well in order to break them appropriately. I don't know if His Holiness actually said that, but someone attributed it to him.
미술. That's it. I think the very purpose of Kasata rules is some benefit to humanity, and particularly the concerns of the group of the people.
Yes.
And then if that, the circumstances always changing. So certain rules is made in, say, 100 years ago, right? 100 years ago. The situation may not be same. So you have to judge.
So the point His Holiness is making is that we forget that actually rules are human creations, and they were motivated by certain ideas. But
I mean, genuine rules.
Genuine rules, yeah.
Some rules, different different motivation.
So, but the point about the rules is that they are devices to help us, sort of create a pattern. But one needs to be able to adjust to the changing circumstances. But at the same time, it's a balance because you cannot be changing rules all the time.
Yes. So we do find that overly rigid interpretation of rules or punishment and sanction for breaking rules, extreme punishment for breaking rules, can be an inhibitor of compassion in organizations.
Because the underlying principle behind a rule should be really about a motivation to be of benefit. What is helpful?
Yes. Yes. Well, luckily, in the case of the fire, other leaders in the organization stepped in and helped this particular director find a way to appropriately make an exception to the rule. So the people who had lost everything in a fire received housing. And that points to leadership, as Chuck and Jane are living here out on the stage, as an amplifier. Leaders can do at least 3 things that we've found evidence for to amplify compassion within their organizations. First, as I mentioned, they can provide flexibility when people want to generate a customized response. Second, they can role model appropriate action, so they show the way for other people to act. And third, they can tell stories and consistently reinforce the value of common humanity. We heard Lloyd Dean do that this morning. We heard our leaders on the panel do that this afternoon. In our research, we have found that the value of common humanity, that we're all in it together, that it's good to take care of each other, that we share a fate, is a primary value that amplifies compassion in the organization. So, because values get so much attention when we talk about compassion in organizations, I'd like to conclude my remarks about amplifiers with attention to the more mundane organizational routine. While it doesn't get as much press as organizational values, organizational routines are arguably more important for fostering and amplifying compassion in organizations, because routines are the regular, repeated ways that people know how to do something in the organization and to get something done with other people. In the case of the fire, this organization had very strong routines for corporate citizenship, for global volunteering. They were very practiced at working together to adjust to meet the needs of someone who was suffering. They also had strong communication routines that made it legitimate and easy to communicate harm using email and other formal communication vehicles, which sped up the response. They had selection routines that helped attract people to the organization who would fit with this kind of culture, and many other day-to-day ways of doing the work that could be put into the service of meeting the needs of people who were suffering. So when you start to look at compassion in organizations through this lens of amplifiers and inhibitors that we've been developing through our research, we have found that you begin to see some fundamental implications for compassion and business and compassion and organizations that go beyond, but may include, as Jane pointed to, the financial obligations of an organization. Without the experience of compassion in their work, and without witnessing compassion from others, as Chuck said, employees grow weary, they disengage, and we lose people who could be otherwise very talented and contribute to our success. Without the capability of discerning changing situations and feeling compassion for people in our supply chain, we cannot begin to do the high-quality service that's demanded by our customers, by patients in a healthcare system, or by partners in global organizations. Without compassion for the difficulty of working together across time zones and diversity and highly interdependent tasks, we have a very hard time doing what's demanded in today's global organizations. And finally, especially for today's audience in this setting, it's very important to note that without empathy for our customers, without compassion for the changing nature of our work, and without compassion for the errors that Chuck mentioned, the errors that we know will inevitably arise when we're trying to do something new, we cannot lead, create, and sustain truly innovative organizations.
Thank you. Your Holiness, if you would like to respond to any of the comments at this point, or I have specific questions from the audience, whatever you would like to do at this point.
Perhaps I may sort of add a little bit. The compassion. There are two levels. One is the sense of concern and what others will be. simply the counter such.
It's more at the level of feeling, as a sentiment.
Chikdi, that piggy tunget tone, that tunget tawas cheku samachi, tunget drendegulu.
So the other form of compassion could be more than a sentiment. There might be an element where you want to do something.
Yes.
So not only concerned about other, but also sense of responsibility to do something. Then in order to, I think the first level, even I think animal, those social animals, they are one of their sort of the company.
One of their partners.
Suffer or something, some kind of sort of the expression of their empathy there. But then immediate, maybe they do something. But then we human beings, you see, we have the ability, you see, to investigate what are the causes of that suffering, and the way to overcome that, we have this intelligence. So now, in order to do something, you see, you should know the whole
larger picture. The larger picture. The larger picture.
Larger picture. And then, with knowing the larger picture, then your,
response.
The reality, then your approach naturally be more realistic approach. So here, our mind should look any event more wider
perspective.
Just a single way, we can't see the whole picture. So we must look more wider way.
Perspective now.
Yeah. So, holistic look, anything, then that brings not only now sense of concern, I think biologically come. Then sense of responsibility to do something effectively. That's, I think, much related with human intelligence. Intelligence. Then another thing, now nearly forgot something. Again, in order to investigate, in order to look objectively, calm mind is important. If your mind is too much involved in desire or anger, then our mind becomes biased. So with biased mind, we can't see the reality objectively. So here also, you see, I think important role about compassion, sense of concern of others' well-being. You see, that creates calm mind. And with calm mind, then we can investigate the reality, whether positive or negative. If it's too much sort of biased attitude, then we can't see. If too much sort of desire, then we can see only positive thing. If too much hatred, see only negative thing. So these are, I think, the system of the
human mind.
The human mind. That I want to. Just as I felt. Otherwise, temptation no showing.
No.
Temptation.
In the Buddhist text, there is an expression at the end of someone's statement. You say, "Well said, I agree." So that was His Holiness's response to the presentation.
All three, really wonderful. All these things, you say, you come from your own experiences. So wonderful. many of my knowledge through
Thinking.
thinking. So your knowledge through practice. So your knowledge is much better than my just empty thinking.
I do have a couple of questions that I think will draw from your not so empty head.
Okay, good.
One is that the competition, the conflict perhaps between competition and compassion, and that business is an institution dedicated to competition. How does the individual hold within himself or herself both the values of competition but also the values of compassion?
Competition, there are two kinds of competition. One sense of competition, you want to be top. Here, you see, there are some sort of element. You want the others also further progress. So in order to do that, you show the way you try to become top. That also some kind of sense of competition. That's the positive. Another competition is in order to you become top, actually create problem to other, not because of the
In the process, you're willing to create obstacles for others so that they don't, reach where you are.
That kind of competition is foolish. Long run, suffer yourself. So right kind of competition, actually pursuing others, further develop. So you want to show them the proper way to develop. So good. You should not remain behind. Competition.
In fact, in Buddhist practice, there's a basic practice called going for refuge in the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, the teaching, and the monastic community or spiritual community. And the way, the attitude with which you relate to the spiritual community, there is a sense of competition because you see them as your peers and you compare your experience with theirs. So there is an element of competition in that attitude. In fact, when we seek refuge in them, we are not seeking refuge by simply putting them up on the pedestal and worshiping them, but rather your attitude is you would like to become like one of them.
Another question which reoccurs 2 or 3 times is how leaders, and you have certainly met many, if not most of the leaders of the world, are very busy persons, and certainly in Silicon Valley, our business leaders are very, very busy persons. Last week you met with President Obama, who is clearly very tightly scheduled. How do individuals who are leaders in that way find room in their lives for the spiritual practices which will continue to develop compassion?
Intellectual level check. 남주도 스타선다. 다 디가는 비슷한 용도로. 봐. 다 디와데마 즉 시제 삼는 동당데 표시시지도 아주 용도인 거야.
그래, 또 그것도 뒤지고 돈에 세계에서 났어.
So intellectual that 뒤지고 time change 전에 거다 제스무스 넣어버다. 그거 30일 당 가진 거다. 배는 싫어 쳐, 싫어 써, 싫어 묘스 전에 intellectual 강 쉬우지 요도 되고. 이제 뒤야 가서다. 야, 자 시제미 삼분 도단디. 다 내가 탑지 쳐도 싫어 쳐서야 돼. 탑지 쳐도 소로디 패지 시제 삼로 찍게 닝돌래야가 표시시 차지. 싫어 그도 그거 있는 지도 되는 거다.
Perhaps one distinction that could be made is that, of course, leaders are very busy and their minds are always occupied by something that is drawing their attention. So while one is at that intellectual level, the cognitive level, completely engaged in a busy activity. At the same time, there is no contradiction in that individual being able to maintain a level of composure and calmness at the deeper state of mind. So here, one can say one dimension is the cognitive dimension, the other dimension is the more of an affective, emotional dimension. And at the level of the emotional or affective state, one can maintain a calmness, a kind of a tranquil state, while cognitively being very busy and paying attention and being occupied.
So intellectual level, very busy. But emotional level, on deeper level, relax. That's possible. But I don't know.
Simple to say.
So you should experiment. then you know.
There is a related question here having to do with
Exercise.
bearing up under the suffering or the risk or the constant tension that comes with being a leader in a rapidly moving organization. And so I think there is a search among many Silicon Valley executives, as reflected in this question, for how to live a life in which you are constantly dealing with the risks that you have taken, dealing with the multiple responsibilities, dealing with the multiple people you are responsible for, and must find the kind of balance that Chuck talked about. Do you have any advice, any insights you can help them with out of either Buddhist philosophy or your own views on compassion that would help them deal with that constant existence in which they are dealing with so many things of such pressure?
그래서 가서 그러면 마음 벌 그림 매체래. 마음 베네지 심시 시비지 가고라다. 지도자는 논주 용식을 봐. 이네 개시주 때 샘거 와는 예바 매사들. 또 그놈들이죠.
This relates to the question of, when we speak about risk, it relates to the question of future. And there is a Tibetan expression that future, a defining characteristic of future is its openness. Nobody can really predict what's going to happen in the future. So trying to be, trying to be so exact in trying to forecast and being overwhelmed by not having met that forecast is in some sense a sort of an unrealistic approach, because the very nature of the future is open. And therefore, to counter this, there is another expression in Tibetan which says, he whose intention was good, he has no remorse. So the point is that it's really intention where you can take greater kind of charge, ensuring that your intention is right.
So out of sincere motivation, sometimes fail the object. But then you carry that sincere motivation, so no regret, no reason to regret. Again, it's a self-centered attitude, carry something. Then failure, I think more regret.
There is
What do you your
So
response?
is inviting other panelists to jump in.
Yeah, it's like the previous question you asked. How do you find time? You just have to prioritize, don't you? Some people prioritize it to stay physically fit. Some people will take time and follow a more spiritual path. We all know about mindfulness, trying to be in the moment and getting rid of the noise and the confusion around you, but so it allows you to focus. I think people do it in their own, they find their own way.
그래서
there are two other themes here. One has to do with your embracing of a secular culture. And you have said that one, I'm paraphrasing, that one does not have to be religious. One can have mindfulness and compassion as a secular person. How do you see that? How does one who is a secular person achieve compassion and the same commitment to the humanity of all of those that they deal with?
In fact, the entire conversation that we are having on this in this panel discussion has really nothing to do with religion in general.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
When so lute tanga chöd de tanga jigmur. Chöd mandir lute tanga samda jumur.
For example, when we think about our physical health, we can approach the issue of physical health from a religious point of view, based on religious faith and practice. But at the same time, we can approach the same objective without bringing religion into the picture at all.
So similarly, now these are taking care about our emotion. That also is one part related with religious faith, about next life, heaven, all these things. Another, no, simply the day by day,
Our welfare.
well-being, simply calm mind, happy mind.
So we can approach these issues, without in a secular way.
In a meeting about an hour and a half ago, you met with a group of students from Santa Clara, and you pointed at them and you said, you are the next generation and that we turn everything over to you, and you either do it or you don't. How do, I leave Monica out of this and Jinpa, but how do elders of Silicon Valley and elders of the Compassion movement, how do we turn over this challenge of achieving compassion in society and organizations to the next generation? How do we build in that next generation the same commitment to compassion that at least some have shown in this generation?
I think naturally, the elder people have much more experiences. So we, because witness or observed all sort of those
Events.
unhappy things due to too much self-centered attitude and also too much short-sighted and too much lack of holistic. I think many world events which we observed. So we, because of that, have these experiences. Then tell them, this is our sort of actual experiences. So all these due to, I think ultimately, due to lack of sense of, because of that, concern or sense of concern of others' well-being, concern of larger communities' well-being, short-sighted and selfish, self-centered attitude. That, I think, elder people's, because of that.
Responsibility.
Yesterday, when I sort of, because of that, talks of that, to discuss, I mentioned elder people, we have our own beauty. There's more experiences. On the basis of more experiences, suppose we have more wider perspective.
Wisdom, Lord.
Wisdom, more wisdom. The younger people, their beauty is everything fresh, and future is in their own hand, like that. They can deal. So actually, I think in order to build healthy world, happy world, we both, elder people, younger people, we all have the responsibility. But I think we elder people physically relax and then telling them, sharing our experiences, then let them do.
I will make the next of last question here, one regarding,
You have something to say.
well,
Oh, I was
Please.
going to return to the question about risk, if we could, for a moment, because it was striking me as I was reflecting on our conversation that Jane told a beautiful story about a group of people banding together to take a risk on the verge of bankruptcy because they believed in the purpose of what they were doing, and the purpose they held together as a group, higher than simply financial gain, but looking to accomplish something that they believed should be accomplished in the world. And I'm sure that Chuck has had experiences at Adobe where there were tough decisions to be made or there were risks to be taken. And a part of discerning as a leader the wise risk from the foolish risk and leading people in such a way that they too understand their involvement in that risk so that the leadership compassionately becomes leading as a community together, knowing that together we're stepping into risky territory and we're doing it for a purpose and a reason with shared and collective value. And that seems to me a bit different than the understanding of the individual entrepreneurial risk taker out there on his own, which might be a bit of a myth these days. We need other people. Our organizations and our technology are so complex. We have to find ways to make that risk held as a community and determine when it's purposeful risk-taking.
red 가시게 리스크를 내는데 미치란 지금 고지에 삼단 거도 되다 말했어. 그 리스크 그 교제될 램벌이야. 예, 코유 방법 차. 제ben은 팬도다 덴베 고농 그 돈에 렌초로 봤어.
Right. Let me ask the last question here has to do with the role of women in the world. And Your Holiness is well known for his encouraging both men and women, and has even said that women, Western women or women who are liberated can help save the world. Could you comment on how the role of women in the hope for the future of the world, and also anything about how we might reach out to the women who are not as free as many of the women in Western countries are?
Firstly, this way, I usually say, telling people I think a few 100,000 years ago, at the beginning of human society, human being, then a small population, their life quite simple, no concept of leadership, everybody equal. Then population increase, the farming system started. Then the concept of mine increased. My land, my sort of house, like that. So then some mischievous actions started. So then the concept of leadership come. At that time, no rule of education. So in order to become leadership, the physical strength, like some animals, like that. So then male dominance eventually come. Then later, education start. So education brings opportunity to both male, female. So a little bit more equal. Now time come. We have to talk. We have to think more about compassion, sense of affection. In that field, female biologically more sensitivity about others' pain. So, at a time, we need a special effort to promote human compassion. The female should take more active role. So some scientists, you see, they tested one sort of picture someone sort of painful sort of experiences. Then they watch by female, male. Then physically, the response, female, more stronger. That's a biological factor.
I agree.
I think if world leader, female, perhaps less conflict, less violence.
I agree. I agree with that. I agree with that.
So, then, if that is true, I wish I should be female. Or at least through operation.
I could
So, I think the simple sort of example, butcher,
Yes,
most cases male,
yes,
isn't it?
yes.
Then human history, most of the heroes who kill mercilessly their enemy, most cases male. Of course, some female exception also, you see, they are really merciless. So overall, so therefore, now the female should take more active role. Leadership role, promoting. I think in hospital, nurses, in aeroplane, kasa hostel kasa.
Air hostesses.
Most cases female. And then especially they trained big smile, but most cases artificial smile. So long in aeroplane, they really smile. Outside aeroplane, no longer any smile. So almost their duty to smile to others. Not come from here. So this clearly shows, you see, because of the human nature, more sort of affection. And of course, a mother, female. In my own case, my mother, very, very compassionate. My father, short temper. A few occasions I also get kasa. My father. Slaps. My mother, never.
Never.
So generally speaking like that. So therefore, a female, not only sort of equal, treated equal, but also, you see, more active role in this field, that I feel.
Thank you. Thank you. May I invite our panel members to make any final comment they would like? Jane?
Well, I was thinking about the question about how to pass on to the next generation. And I think there is room for teaching. I think there's room for His Holiness to lead some of that way. Maybe there's room for, I know of no good book on the subject of compassion in business. I think there are a number of practical things that we could do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's one of the purposes of today, is to give energy to what we do here in Silicon Valley going forward. Monica?
Yes.
Yes, I would like to close with two observations that come from our research that we wanted to convey to today's audience. The first, that although we believe people have a basic impulse toward compassion, our work has taught us how difficult it is at times for people in workplaces to see that their colleagues are in distress. And so that inability to notice suffering at work causes a great deal of further suffering. And so I would encourage anyone in the audience today to adopt a question or a more observational tone as to the well-being of the people around them in their workplace. And secondly, our research has shown that it doesn't just involve a compassion giver or a compassion receiver. This social exchange model doesn't necessarily apply to compassion. People experience profound effects from being on the sidelines and witnessing compassion organizing like that I described in relation to the fire, or compassion expressed toward a colleague, or compassion from a manager toward an employee. And the fact that those witnessing effects occur mean that small expressions of compassion in our social life can have hugely profound effects.
Good. Thank you. Chuck?
We touched earlier on the fact that there is both a religious and a secular point of view with a lot of the topics we're talking about in terms of compassion and ethics and the golden rule and how you treat one another. I think from my point of view, it frankly doesn't matter that they're based on religious principles. What's important from the conversation we're having is that they're great business principles as well. And so irrespective of your background and how you got to where you are in the business world, don't think about those as things you don't want to touch because they have a caste of religion imposed on them. Deal with them because they are good business and they will come back to make your business more successful.
Your Holiness, do you want to say anything more, or shall we end the panel discussion for this afternoon?
Perhaps it's one little thing. I think usually you see people feel compassion, love, these more or less spontaneous sort of the feeling or expression. And also we take for granted that. So now here we need some distinction or sense of concern of others' well-being. One level, biological level. That's even animals, their own youngsters, their own member of the same community. So there is spontaneous sort of feeling, sense of concern of the other's well-being. Now we need that biological factor sort of compassion as a seed, then use human intelligence to further strengthen. The first level, biased only towards your own relatives or those people or those factors which nice to you. So you see, that kind of sense of compassion is very much oriented about others' attitude. So that kind of compassion cannot extend towards your enemy, because enemy harmful to you. Now another level, use human intelligence, reasons, the human society, irrespective individual's attitude to you, but all people are the member of the community or society, and further goes, member of humanity. So my future depends on humanity. So therefore, and each humanity, say, instinctively want happiness, do not want suffering. And on that basis, we call human right. Human right, nobody say human right, only my friend, no our enemy. No, we never say that. Every human being has a right because everyone wants a happy life, do not want suffering. On that sort of understanding, we build the genuine sense of concern of them. So irrespective whether their attitude towards you, positive or negative, doesn't matter. Still they are human beings. They have a right to be happy person. So that only human being can do, not animal. So because we have this intelligence, so more holistic and long-term interest. So we have the ability. So in that level of compassion, we need to educate, use intelligence. The first level, biological, take for granted. Compassion level.
So I think it's important to be able to make that distinction because sometimes we tend to confine the understanding of compassion just to the level of sentiment which we naturally possess, and we don't appreciate there is another dimension which we can bring where we can actually strengthen it and extend it even to our enemy.
So first level is biased, only your friend side. Second level, unbiased towards entire humanity, and further goes entire sentient being.
Thank you. Thank you.
So education institution like this university have very great responsibility to educate that.
Thank you. This is His Holiness's last event at Santa Clara today, and we have been very graced by your willingness to come to Santa Clara. For this panel, I'm very grateful to Jane Shaw and to Monica Worline and to Chuck Geschke for being willing to be in dialogue today with the Dalai Lama. While the Dalai Lama is getting ready to go, we are welcoming Michael Fitzpatrick, who is a cellist who has performed with and for His Holiness any number of times over the last 10 years. And he has about a 4 to 5 minute meditation on the cello, which he will be performing, and the Dalai Lama will depart, His Holiness will depart at that point, and then the event is concluded. So, Michael, if you would like to go right ahead.
나버리시고. 나버리시고 왜 새도 팀사다.
Thank you to Michael Fitzpatrick for being with us today, for coming up from Los Angeles for that performance. And immediately following His Holiness's departure in the motorcade outside, there will be a reception for all of you, our special guests, in the Locatelli Center, directly across this little alleyway here. And there'll be coffee and tea and food. So please join us there as soon as His Holiness has departed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to see new instrument. This new instrument, not a big one.
Very small.
Much smaller. Out of here,
Oh,
goes here,
right.
there, up there, and then hopefully here.
The sound looks like it's an old sort of phenomena which creates problems. Also some good things. Gradually dissolve. More subtler. Ultimately, clear light. So your sound looks like that. Thank you. Wonderful.
Picture of the panel.
That would be nice.
Oh, Ben.
Pen.
So mindfulness.
So wonderful to see you again.
Thank you. 보라를 보지 말래. 이게 소리. Wonderful.
for
Thank you.
being with us
Thank you.
and for bringing this subject to our conversation.
Thank you.
I hope I can be of service to your vision.
Thank you. Thank you. England.
Be well, Your Highness. Be well.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. 다 그네.
I think he would like to
Take a quick group picture
Hmm.
with everybody.
Oh.
Just come in front.
Yes. Come here. Thank you. Thank you. Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye bye. Thank you.
thank you again.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your generosity to come.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you.
very much. You're a blessing.
Thank you. 가. 고도. 오늘. 저기 중앙으로.